Hello, and welcome to Hedgehog's Storytime, where I read my weird original fiction. The following story is part of the Edie Valley Project. Link to the playlist in the description below. Yes, you have to read them all. No, that is not a request. This is the end. This is the last part of the climax. After this, there is one more story in this arc. And for a short time, we will have to say goodbye to Edie Valley. But never fear, it will be back soon enough. Holy shit, the climax is so huge I had to split it into multiple parts. Part 3. Now that Cindy finally got a good look at him, she could see that yes, Nihil was, in fact, her brother. His hair was longer and darker, his skin paler and cheeks gaunt, but the eyes didn't lie. The look in them was different. They were harder, unrecognizing, yet they were still his. What had the director done to him? I don't think I'd trust him, Niko warned. He's clearly not your brother anymore. He's probably lying. Cindy hesitated, the flames dancing in the doorway between them. Nihil stared back at her, and Cindy was shocked to realize that the gaze was nearly impenetrable. His mind, it was hardly human anymore. Still, there was that small thought at the back of her mind. She hoped he was telling the truth. Cindy took a deep breath and let out the flames. Then she stepped past the threshold and into the classroom. "Tommy," she called back over her shoulder, "Miller family meeting." Tommy seemed nearly surprised to be included, but after a second followed after her. Marcell frowned. "The moment this goes south, you're gonna tear his throat out, I know." Cindy nodded, before she and her brothers disappeared into the classroom. Cindy had imagined this reunion numerous times, but it had never been like this in her head. She sat at a desk, and Tommy followed suit a second later. Nihil hesitated, as if unsure of what to do, before Cindy grabbed his hand to lead him to the desk next to her. He flinched at the touch, and Cindy's heart nearly broke. "So you want to know about Mike?" she asked, mostly to Nihil, but also for Tommy's benefit as well. "Mike is," she corrected. He wasn't gone yet. "Mike is..." But she stopped. How could she tell this complete stranger just who her brother was? How could she verbally explain the essence of a whole person, what made him Mike, in a way that this person would understand? The mail, she finally stuttered out. "Mike always got the mail. Our mother works so hard for us, and she's usually so tired when she gets home that she forgets, so Mike always got the mail for her on his way in from soccer." Tommy and Nihil stared at her, the former wondering where she could be going with this, but the latter looking thoughtful. She took this as a good sign. He was always the thoughtful one, in a way that I could never be. I've always been a little jealous of that, the way he could just care about people. Like he never had to put any effort into it. He never had to think about it. It just happened. Not that he couldn't be a little shit. He was always forgetting his stuff in the weirdest places and begging me to go get them for him. But in the end, I guess that turned out for the best. I doubt he knew, of course, but I think somehow he knew that getting that lunchbox would change everything. He's smart like that. I've been trying to pick up the slack since he's been gone, but I can't be there for Mom like he could. "Carol," Nihil said suddenly, and Cindy and Tommy nearly jumped. "Her name. It's Carol, isn't it?" Blinking, Cindy had to bite her lip to keep from letting out a sob. Yes, she said. "And you're..." He seemed very confused, shaking his head. "You're Cindy. Why do I know that? I don't know anything. I'm nothing." "Did she tell you that?" Tommy asked. Nihil was blinking rapidly. "No, it did." "It?" Cindy asked, but Nihil refused to say more. "You're not nothing," she continued instead. gazing into his eyes. "You're my brother. You've been single-handedly keeping our house together for years. You are amazing." I don't. He looked over to Tommy suddenly. "I don't know you." Cindy looked down. "You would have been too young to remember. Mom and I should have talked about it more." "I'm Tommy," he cut in. "I'm your older brother." At this, Nihil's eyes widened. "We didn't have a father. Growing up, we never had a father. I always wondered why. You and Mom never said anything about it. I didn't even know I had a brother until I dug up an old newspaper clipping in the attic." "You found that?" Cindy asked. Nihil shrugged. "Neither of you were going to tell me anything about it. I didn't want to make you sad, that's..." "Who is this?" He seemed nearly horrified at the words coming out of his mouth. "That's Mike," Cindy smiled. "That's you. I don't know what the director did to you, but nothing will ever change that fact." "No, I don't understand." He clutched at his head. "All these things. My head doesn't make sense. My chest is tight." Tommy patted him on the head, and he suddenly looked more his age. Less edges. Mike had no edges at all. "Those are called feelings, my man. They're kind of a bitch, but we've all got to deal with them one way or another." "I remember this. It's terrible." Laughing, Tommy just shook his head. "That it is." "I'm so confused." Nihil rubbed his temple. "Who am I?" "I don't know," Cindy said. "You were Mike. Now, maybe you're not. There's so much I can't remember. Some of it's beginning to come back, but can you help me?" He looked at Cindy, pleading with his eyes, and she couldn't help seeing her pudgy-faced little brother asking her to play with him. "Can you help me find Mike again?" "You don't need to find him. He's still in there. I know it. But yes," she grinned. "I'll help you as much as you need." She wrapped her arms around him. Tommy hesitated, not sure if he could join in, but Cindy winked and his arms were in turn around her. They sat there like that for a long time, just listening to each other breathe. Finally, for the first time in 13 years, they were all together. "I hate to break up this touching family reunion," came Niko's voice from the doorway, "but it looks like we've got problems." The three of them broke apart and looked at each other for a moment before following Niko from the classroom. Out in the hall, Mike looked around at the assembled crowd, all the familiar and unfamiliar faces. It seemed that Morna and Gil had joined the group while the three had been having their feelings jam. Mike blinked at the two of them in recognition, but a second later his eyes drifted over to Marcell. "Wait," he said, all edges again. "You're Mike, my old history teacher. What are you doing here?" Marcell looked over to Cindy helplessly. "It's a long story," she said simply. "One you can tell later," Niko interrupted. "You're not going to murder us, right?" He turned to Mike. "Only if you try first." "Fair enough," Niko replied, nodding. "These two just got here." He gestured to Morna and Gil. "Looks like it's your lucky day, Marcell. We might get to find your truth after all." Gil took a step forward. "The army of mechanics has been dealt with, and the angels of battle are helping the last of the children to safety. I'm sorry about your eye, by the way." He added to Niko. "You're not forgiven yet, but give me a little while." Niko gave him. "That doesn't matter now," Morna interjected. "The director got away from us in the heat of battle. I believe she's in league with the truth. I can feel it. It is here. It will use her, and then it will destroy her. And who knows what will happen then. We can't let this stand." "First and foremost," Niko regained the floor, "this is a rescue mission. Looks like we were successful in that regard. Cindy, Tommy, Mike, Nihil, whatever the hell, if you guys want to go back, feel free. You've been through a lot." The three of them looked at each other. Then Cindy looked over to Marcell. He'd helped her so much in finding Mike. Now it was time to help him with his mission. "I'm staying," she said, looking specifically at Marcell. "You're gonna need all the firepower you can get." "She's right," Mike said. I think I've seen it. The thing down there. That things should never see the light of day. Well, shit, Tommy blinked. If you guys are staying, I guess I will too. I, don't suppose we could talk this thing to death, huh? Probably not, Marcell grimaced. In that case, I hope I don't drag you all down. So we're decided, Niko said, and everyone nodded. Then down into the depths we go. That room that the director was having. Nihil, guard. Mike seemed to struggle with the name. That's the main entrance. If there's any place it will be, it's down there. Lead the way, Niko said, and as a group they followed Mike back down the hallway into the door that Service had been previously leaving them to. Cindy now saw with a pit growing in her stomach that the plaque on the door was engraved with the words, "The Director." Of course it was. At this point, she shouldn't even have been surprised. They all hesitated at the door, and Niko rolled his eyes before twisting the handle, muttering something about having to do everything around here. The door opened near silently, and the 8 of them stepped inside. The office was surprisingly barren, as if it was rarely used. In fact, nothing much was in here at all except an empty desk and a few bookshelves towards the back. Cindy opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted by a harsh crackle as unseen speakers came to muffled life.
My, there are a lot of you, aren't there?
Asked a voice, which Cindy vaguely recognized. Isn't that Abigail Hodge is the director? We've already established this. Yes, Gil sighed. Far too many times.
I see you've undone my hard work on Paragon Beta. A shame, but not unexpected.
The voice continued.
A necessary sacrifice. He knows the way down. I'll be waiting.
With a click, the speaker went dead once more. Cindy glanced back and forth between them all. What did they have to work with? A vampire, a mafioso in training, her gypsy brother, an automaton, a superpowered human experiment, and 2 ancient heroes. It seemed like a lot, it's true, but up against an evil so great that its very nature could only be described by the highly undescriptive words, "the truth," it may have not been enough. There was, however, only one way to find out. Mike flipped the switch on the wall on and off in quick succession, and without much fanfare the bookshelves on the far end of the room swung open to reveal an elevator behind. Of course, Niko shook his head. I don't know what else I expected. Inside, the elevator was large, with enough room for all of them, plus some extra space to spare. It slid downwards, as smooth as water, so much so that it hardly felt like they were moving at all. They were silent, glancing between each other with worried looks. Gil and Morna locked eyes, while Marcell grabbed Cindy's hand. Among them, only Mike looked unaffected by the approaching atmosphere. He simply stared straight ahead, waiting. After what seemed like a long time, the elevator came to a halt, but in the second before it opened, they all froze. For from the other side of the door, something was banging. Cindy raised a hand. Morna gripped Brandow. Everyone held their breath as slowly the doors slid open. Of course, slurred a voice from the other side. Of fucking course, come on, I don't want to die down here. It seemed to take the kid a second to realize that the door had opened. His white hair bobbed as he swayed on his feet, and his whole body was affected by what appeared to be spasms. He twitched uncontrollably, except for his hands, which endured a constant shaking. He blinked once or twice, then grinned stupidly as he caught sight of Mike. Oh, hey, Mike. What you doing down here with us sinners? Wait, Mike? Mike concentrated. It seemed to cause his head a great deal of pain. You're my roommate, right? Doug. You're not a Langstanks murderer anymore? Jesus, she really did a number on you too, huh? Doug spasmed again and half slid, half fell against the wall. This kid needs to get to a hospital, Tommy said. People aren't supposed to shake like that. Niko glanced up at him, unamused. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Who can we spare? He glanced around at the assembled group of witches, heroes, and science experiments. You're not going to go for leaving Cindy, are you, Tommy? Not a chance. Welp, Niko sighed. I guess that leaves me. Besides, this truth thing is your guys' shtick. I'll head back up with this guy and you all keep going. Cindy blinked gratefully. We'll do our best. The group trooped out of the elevator, and Niko stepped back inside, Doug's arm braced against his shoulders. "Just don't do anything stupid," he said before the elevator doors closed. They all paused, as if waiting for something. Niko had been the one who made the decisions, but someone was going to have to step forward. Cindy sighed. "All right, everyone," she said. "Let's start looking." She placed a foot forward, one in front of the other, and slowly, the others began to follow her, down into the abyss. The elevator ascended in silence, Doug shaking and Niko trying to keep the taller man upright. Niko was worried about the others. It was true. Cindy would step forward to lead them, he knew that, but that lingering doubt about what they would face down there below the earth stuck with him. Either way, it made sense for him to come back up. His planning was done. He couldn't possibly prepare for a formless horror from the nameless eons of history. He wasn't particularly powerful, at least compared to the others. What he had was his mouth and his head. And his head, right now, was telling him to get this kid out of Hodge's kinky torture dungeon. So lost in thought was he that he didn't even realize Doug was staring at him, blinking blearily in confusion. "Do I know you?" Doug slurred. Niko paused. "I was one of the people who broke into St. Adelaide's the first time." No, I remember that." Doug attempted to wave him off, but only managed a rather pathetic shake. "I mean from somewhere else. I'm sure of it." "We've never met before. Whatever she did to you fucked up your brain." I was sure. How did you lose your eye?" Doug's eyes were wide and unfocused as he stared down at the eye patch. Caught off guard by the question, Niko stuttered. Did you give it for knowledge and hang from the world tree for 9 days?" "What? 9? That's how many days he'd been in the hospital." Doug laughed. "I'm just kidding." He grinned lopsidedly. "Norse myth, Odin lost his right eye. Never mind." He concluded hastily at Niko's frown. "I remember. Gil's handiwork, right?" "You think you're a pretty funny guy, huh?" Niko asked. "Me?" Doug shook his head. "I have to be to cover the crippling self-loathing." "I can't tell if this is the drugs or whatever the hell, or if you're always like this." A sudden spasm almost brought Doug to his knees, and Niko too under his weight. "I may never be the same again. I'm insane. Mercury poisoning right to the brain." "Is that what she did to you? Jesus Christ, we've got to get you to a hospital stat." "I'm sure the Bifrost can get us there, lickety," Doug began, before passing out, his head falling downwards like a deflated balloon. Something didn't sit right with Niko. The elevator opened, but even as he dragged Doug through the doors, Niko couldn't help feeling that he'd been here before. The corridor was dark. The metal walls a rusted, corroded something. It was hard to tell, and the air tasted of blood and suffering. The only noise was the hard breathing the 7 of them made as they slowly moved forward. Mike froze a few steps in, clutching his temples. "What's wrong?" Cindy asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. He blinked several times. She took me down here in the dark, so cold. Pain, only it. It? The cold, hard, objective truth. I can feel it too. Morna nodded. It's close.
"So that is what you're after."
Abigail's voice crackled suddenly from the walls, everywhere.
"You want my little parasite. You can try. You might even think you've succeeded, but you'll never be able to truly get rid of it for me."
They ignored her and kept walking forward.
"Oh? Are you still going to try?"
She laughed.
"Wonderful. I can see you're all struck with the very same curiosity that I am. Just keep walking straight ahead. Big old doors, you can't miss 'em."
Her voice echoed in the sudden silence. The 7 paused for a second, each uneasy. "I don't think we want to go in there," Mike said. "You haven't seen it. You should spare your minds and your sanity." "But we've come this far," Marcell interjected, Do you know how many years I've been searching for this? Why would you look for it? Because I need to know. Cindy put her hand in his. She understood his drive. What he hoped the truth could give him. You won't be able to see for very long. Gil stepped forward. That thing needs to be destroyed once and for all. As long as I can get my answer first. Hey, guys, normally I would say let's go for it, Tommy said suddenly. But, Surface is shaking. They all looked down at the automaton, only to see that Tommy was right. Surface's eyes were wide, darting back and forth wildly as his whole body shook. No, he mumbled. Don't go back. Don't want to go back. Don't want to go back? Cindy asked. What does he mean? Marcell sighed and turned to her. The first time we were here, when Service wandered off, he did so because Orem was having him follow Abigail. He tailed her down here, and we think he saw the truth, but we don't know because that's right when we lost connection. And after that is when he started acting strange, Cindy concluded. Do you think something happened to him? Don't go! Service blurted out very loudly. Tommy patted him on the head. Don't worry, he said. We won't let anything happen to you, but right now we need your help. Service gulped, but his shaking began to subside. Then we're agreed? Cindy asked. We go in there, kick Abigail's ass, and destroy the son of a bitch? The group nodded and started walking again. A minute later, they reached the door at the end of the hallway, just like Abigail said, and with only a second's hesitation, Cindy took a deep breath and pushed it open. The room inside was large and round. Instruments of science were set willy-nilly around the exterior, but the thing that drew all eyes was the enormous possibly tank in the center of the room, its sides shuttered with huge slabs of metal. The 7 of them filed in silently, each preparing in their own way. Marcell's eyes widened. Morna drew her sword. Cindy could see Mike practically jumping out of his skin. So here we are, finally, said an unmistakable voice, and the party glanced up to a balcony behind the tank to see Abigail Hodge grinning down at them, the harsh light shining off her glasses. I can't say that I didn't plan for this, she continued. The minute I saw you outside of the gates, I knew you would be the ones. Oh, but where's the short one with the insufferable smirk? He's getting your experiment to a hospital. Cindy glowered upwards. Abigail blinked. Doug? He's still not dead? Of course he's not. At this point, I'm pretty sure that skinny, sickly-looking fuck is nigh immortal. But we're not here to talk about Doug. Would you like to see my parasite? She grabbed a button on a cord that dangled from the ceiling, but hesitated in pressing it. You know, it feels almost anticlimactic to end it like this. I mean, without this thing, I would have never been able to finish my project, and here I am feeding it to a bunch of cannon fodder. I mean, to be fair, it will probably just kill you all, and it won't be a climax at all, but on the off chance, she shrugged. Nah, well, that won't happen. I admit I feel kind of bad killing you all like this, she continued, sighing. You all had such potential, such character. It feels like such a waste to end it here. Some of you have hardly had any time to develop properly. What are you even talking about? Tommy asked, narrowing his eyes in annoyance. Mike leaned closer to Cindy. I'm going to go after her. There's a corridor behind that balcony. As soon as she hits that button, she's going to dash. She nodded as imperceptibly as she could manage. Enough monologuing, Marcell interjected. You're right. I have done plenty of that, haven't I? Abigail's grin widened. All right, suit yourselves. A pleasure to meet you all. Goodbye. She hit the button, and immediately a cloud of fog obscured her balcony, covering her escape, and slowly, the metal shutters began to open. Abigail ran. She wasn't used to running. It wasn't really her style. She was more of the sit in a high-backed chair while stroking a white cat sort of person. But sometimes, to get what you wanted, you had to take the more difficult option. Besides, Paragon Beta was inevitably already behind her. The fog would slow him down. All of the water molecules would confuse him and make her harder to see. A little trick she'd learned from all those years she'd had Project Alpha locked up in the basement. And she needed him to be slow, because in her head was screaming.
Betrayer! Forsaker! You disregard the truth!
That's right, Parasite. You've outlived your usefulness. These pawns back there will either die or tear you apart, and now all she'll have to do is find a way to get rid of this little hanger-on in her head. Beta was getting closer. Abigail could hear his frustrated breath near her ear as he chased her upwards through the darkened tunnel. Now was the moment of truth. The light was up ahead. She'd be more visible to him now, a shadow against the light reflecting off the mist. A second later, she felt a hand brush her shoulder. Too close.
You don't want me dead, Nihil,
she called back to him. Give me one reason why not. His voice was different now. Monotone, lacking all the boyish nervousness that it had once possessed. She had broken him. God, it made her horny. She paused. He wouldn't kill her until he got an answer. But she couldn't die. Not yet.
Because I'm the only one who can fix that scrambled head of yours.
Don't call her bluff. Don't call her bluff. If he couldn't see her face, he couldn't call her bluff. I should kill you anyway.
But you won't. Abigail began moving away. I'll see you again, Paragon Beta.
She took off, dashing towards the mouth of the tunnel, to the loading dock where Victor had already hot-wired the truck that those idiots had conveniently left behind. Abigail threw herself into the passenger seat, leaned over, and wrapped her arms around Victor as she felt his tongue enter her mouth. After just a second, however, she pulled away, grinned at him, and simply said, "Drive."
Meaningless. Everything is meaningless. You don't matter.
The truth was in front of them, glaring at them from the confines of its glass tank. But they didn't really see it. They were lost, blind, seeing it, but not seeing the endless abyss, the void of eternity. Tommy saw Remus dying. He saw Kay diving into a rift, all the people over the years he couldn't save, that after everything he'd done, all the people he'd helped, there was nothing he could do. Helpless, still that 8-year-old kid at the mercy of the man who was in no way his father. Gilvaden saw his sister, corrupted, dead, not herself. He had to choke her, strangle the life out of her, the one person he held dear. We all die. Nothing matters. Nothing lasts. We all end, just like that. Eyes blank, skin cold, dead. Morna saw her mother, lost in delirium, not able to bear the death of her son, denial, abomination, the thing that had his skin, his eyes, but not him, could not ever be him. This is what happens when you defy the truth, insanity, horror, pain, endless suffering. If Service saw something, no one could guess what it could be. Perhaps just a flash of sunlight, of breath, of things that some part of him might have known once, such a very, very long time ago. The flesh was not real, fleeting, pointless. Marcell saw all of these things, and more. He'd had enough pain to last many lifetimes, but he took a deep breath, focused as hard as he could, through the images of Aurelia crushed, Yulia coughing, Gaius's lifeless body, his blood in Marcell's mouth and on his hands, and asked his question. And there it was. The knowledge he sought, the humanity he craved, and the truth simply stared at him. And laughed.
It doesn't exist.
The truth told him.
If it did, what would be the point? You aren't human. You are so far removed from the humanity you emulate that I'm surprised you've hid yourself this long. You're not human, and you can't ever be. You are a monster, alone denied the one pleasure that humanity receives. You will never die.
He shook. No, he said. No, 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 no. Over and over. He fell to his knees. He was falling back to that deep, dark place he'd found himself in so many times over the centuries, when he gave in to the hunger and the want. Humans were worthless, their lives short and meaningless, just as the truth said. All they were good for was to sustain him. All these people around him, he should just put them out of their misery now. He'd start with the one he cared for the most. Marcell grabbed Cindy's shoulder. He felt the hunger rising. She would taste the best of all. He could tell. That's why he'd been attracted to her in the first place. He knew that deep down. The greatest meal. What are you waiting for? Isn't this what you've really wanted all along? It would be a mercy to end her life now, release her from the pain of the living. But then she looked at him. Perfectly calm. Perfectly fine. Why are you listening to it? She asked simply. He froze in place, and at that moment the reality of what he'd just been about to do came crashing back down upon him. Letting her go abruptly, he fell back down to the ground. I'm sorry, he mumbled to the dirt. I'm so sorry. Cindy put a hand on his head and turned back towards the truth. Because she'd seen all of it. The helplessness, the ends, the fighting in vain, the loss, the uselessness, all of it. And yes, it was the truth. Entropy, meaninglessness, that was all true. But so what? She'd known this truth for years. Her rose-tinted glasses had been removed long ago. Looking back on it now, maybe she'd never really had them in the first place. Feigning them so long she'd nearly forgotten how to take them off again. You're right, she said to it. That is the truth. It's all entropy and void and nothing. Sure, everything is pointless. But it's not about that. Yeah, everything is going to end. But it's here right now. You're here right now. The others began to look at her. First as if she was insane, and then more seriously as she kept speaking. The point isn't the truth. Fuck the truth. The point is what you make with the time you've got, and the people you share it with. It's taken me a long time to learn that. She paused as suddenly Service was beside her, slipping his hand into her own. He nodded. The truth merely laughed at them, the sound reverberating around the inside of their skulls.
Fools. Fools!
But then Tommy was there behind her, and Gil, and Morna, and finally, Cindy reached down and grabbed Marcell's hand. You picked me out of the dirt, she sighed as he resisted. Brought me out of the lowest of the low. Now let me do the same for you. Slowly, he allowed her to help him to his feet. His eyes were still a bright shade of crimson, his features sharp and pointy. But she wasn't afraid. She wrapped her arms around him as tightly as she could so that nothing else could hurt him, not even himself, and whispered, I love you. She pulled away as she felt the tap on her shoulder. Morna smiled at her and placed the sword brand out in her hands. I believe you'll need this, she said. But Cindy shook her head. Together, she insisted. All 6 of them grabbed onto the hilt of the sword now clutched in Cindy's hands.
Do you really think this will change anything?
The truth asked. Maybe not, Cindy said. But like you've been saying, does it really matter? And there, feeling her friends that were there around her, Tommy, Surface, Gil, Morna, Marcell, and those that weren't, Niko, Mike, Orem, Cowell, Lila. Cindy plunged the glowing sword into the heart of the beast. An ear-shattering scream filled her head, and Cindy promptly blacked out.